All right, let's call to order the Brattleboro Planning Commission meeting of June 5th, a couple minutes after 6, I think. Let's start with any announcements. Does anybody have any commissioners?
Other than this is my last, temporary hiatus for me. I'm doing a sabbatical for a while, but I will be attending meetings and walks and tuning in, chiming in, giving support for a little bit. My daughter's getting for college, so I'm just getting all prepped up, but you never know. Sometimes they come back.
Well, thanks for your service.
Yeah, absolutely. I really enjoy being on the planning commission, learning a lot, very educational. I always ask the people out there in Zoom land to join and also be a part of the collective.
Right, so we have one current vacancy and soon to be the second, so public listening, I hope you're interested. And it should be easy to find out how to apply, and if not, contact anyone in town government and they'll direct you. I'll just say that at the last meeting, we spoke a little bit about the idea of adding a running list of kind of just unofficial or possible agenda topics to the our electronic folder. And so I just made a little document that's in the main folder towards the bottom if you have it arranged alphabetically. So feel free to look at that and let me know what you think of what I wrote in that and how to contribute to it. Any other announcements? Sue?
I would just announce that Steve Hayes and I attended the Strong Towns, what did they call it, gathering last week and received the Strongest Town Award we got a plaque for Brattleboro. And it was a nice little presentation where they interviewed us and the gathering was great. A lot of people of like mind getting together, so that's always nice. And we also got to see one neighborhood in Charlotte that's pretty fast growing that has some missing middle housing that we're trying to encourage here. So that was neat to see.
Oh, cool.
Okay.
So after the ceremony, it's official. Strongest Town of 2023. Going through the last couple minutes, May 15th meetings minutes and the May 17th site visits minutes. Let's take the meeting first of May 15th. How about a motion and then we'll discuss any?
I move that we approve the minutes of May 15th.
I second.
Okay, does anyone have any comments or issues with the minutes? I saw though that I think what we were saying regarding the missing middle housing overlay is that the flood hazard overlay and the historic resource overlay do take precedence, but it says do not take precedence in the minutes.
Okay. Yeah, that's
Right, we agreed that they do.
Correct.
Right,
Yeah.
sounds right to me.
So just striking the word not. That's the only thing I caught. There's nothing else. All those in favor?
Aye.
That's the 3 here in person, that's Dan, and that's good enough. I don't know if we'll hear from Sarah because she's
I think there's a hands up feature.
off and on occupied, but in attendance. Okay, moving on to the May 17th site visit. Is there a motion?
Motion that we approve May 17, 2023 minutes.
Second? I'll second.
I have a question.
Sure.
There is a note, this meeting was warned as a site visit. Is that supposed to be arranged or some other word, or?
no,
does it
we
really just say
warned. I
warned?
mean, we warned it as a public meeting so that the public could attend it.
I see, okay. I wasn't familiar with that language. That was the only thing that caught my attention.
Chloe Leary's last name is misspelled in a few places, but besides that, that's all I got.
Well, I was going to ask the one about Franz Reichman expressed that there was concern for some town residents about potential for traffic generation for the development of the site, as well as some concern for some residents about the significant change in the neighborhood. So I don't know, was there a follow-up to his inquiry when he was here public too, or did he?
Well, Sue wasn't there, but I recall the time, I think Mark Westa and Chloe said that they're gonna be very sensitive to those things and look
Yeah.
into it and do studies and just, that's my vague recollection. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I was just looking for anything feedback from them from that, what their response was.
Well, my memory's not good enough to be able to say what should be, you know, written in there that they responded with,
verbatim.
but I guess we could ask
I get-
Steve.
Well, Steve could jump in if he wants to, but what I would say is they're master planning at this time. I mean, as such
Oh,
time that
okay.
it comes before the Development Review Board as a concrete project, you know, I think they'll be aware that that needs to be attended to. It's a little premature to,
Okay.
And the note immediately following that one was regarding a response about the project undergoing a formal traffic study.
Right.
So it does seem that that was addressed and noted here as well.
All set.
What's that?
If there's.
You got a flicker on the TV, it's like it's ready to go.
Yeah, it might make me, no, I'll be okay. If there's nothing else, all those in favor?
Aye.
That's the 3 here, Dan, and probably same deal for Sarah. Okay, so for both of them, 4 ayes, 1 abstention. Moving on to the agenda item, Windham Regional Commission consultation. We have our guest, the Associate Director of the WRC, Sue Westa, to present and hear from us. And
okay. Sue, if you want, you can sit at that table. I'm sorry, I didn't remove that water.
That's okay.
Push it to the side.
No worries. Just move it over. So, yes, do I need to have this
I think that picks up her voice, right? That, the flat one? Is that
I
Okay.
see.
one or both of
very
them.
sensitive?
All right. So the Windham Regional Commission, we receive funding from the state for a lot of our work. Some is in the form of project funding for specific efforts that the state is, you know, trying to pursue, and some is more general that we receive annually. And as part of that more general funding, we're required to meet with the towns, all the towns in our region, a couple times within the period that, you know, between when your plan was approved and you're getting ready to do your next one. And so that's really what, you know, this is about. It's really meant to be a discussion about how your plan and how your plan is working for you, and you know, if you have any other concerns or other things that we can help with. So I see that your plan was adopted in 2018, and that means that it's good until 2026. Which means, you know, that's not that far away. You probably want to think about getting ready to update it, maybe, you know, starting to think about that next year. It depends on the extent of the update that you will be looking to do, if you want to keep it kind of, if you would be doing a major, you know, overhaul, or if you just be updating what you did previously. And so, some of the things that you need to make sure that you do is include all the required state elements in the plan. And there are 2 things I think that happened since you adopted your plan as far as the state is concerned. And one is a requirement to address flood resiliency, and the other one is forest blocks and habitat connections. And I did look through your plan, skimmed through it kind of briefly, and I saw that you touch on those things, but I'm not sure if you have addressed it according to, you know, the current requirements. Okay, Sue thinks you're all set, so you probably are, but just want to make sure on that. And we, as you know, the Windham Regional Commission reviews your plans and, you know, says that it meets all the current statutory requirements. And I saw that there were only minor comments that we had really last time in your plan, so there's not a lot to discuss there. But from your standpoint, how well do you feel like your town plan is working?
It's working. It's a work in progress, as they say.
Okay, well,
Like
that's what
ongoing,
it
you
should
know,
be,
it's
yeah.
room for improvements or, you know, interjection of other things that come along.
Yeah.
State levels and all that, and federal, so I think it's a continual issue, a particular topic that we're gonna continue to look into further and further.
I'd say too, a few things, we don't hear any complaints
Yeah.
Okay, that's great.
One very small thing that we've noticed, or staff has noticed maybe, is that we've talked a little bit about adding some kind of vibrancy and services and commercial aspects to the residential areas. And our plan actually says like, there shall be, uses the word shall, right? There shall be no stores in residential neighborhoods. And, we tried to think like, well, does that kind of still allow for accessory commercial? And we felt like it did, but also looking back, like what was the reasoning for putting that strict wording there? And was it kind of by accident, or was it really intentional? Was there a lot of community, motivation that added, that put that one sentence in there that's nowhere else repeated? Or so we'll probably look at that. Yeah, we have a huge implementation matrix at the end, which we've never talked about so much when I've been on the commission, but I just skimmed through it in preparation for this meeting, and there's 37 instances where the planning commission is mentioned as the lead responsibility for different actions. So that could be the topic of a meeting coming up where we're like, oh, have we done these things?
Okay,
or
so
has someone else done them?
You don't feel like you have a good handle on that, whether
No.
where you've gone,
No,
but it
no,
would be good to check in on.
Yeah, we spend a lot more
Absolutely.
time on the regs than we do the town plan. Absolutely, a whole lot more. So, and it's important that the regs follow from the plan, right? But,
Absolutely.
and we think they are designed and written as such to follow the plan.
Yeah.
Sue?
Can I add a comment? Do you
Please.
mind? So one of the areas that staff, I think, definitely wants to look at in our next update is the Putney Road area and our service center. It's got very suburban zoning, and really we'd like to see some infill housing there. So everything from the setbacks to it just I think we need to deal with infill housing there, and
Yeah, that's a great
get that
opportunity.
and I know that's something that I've spoken to Chris Campany about as well.
Right.
And he's expressed interest in that.
But do you know when that reconstruction project's going to be?
It's been pushed back. I think
Is
it's
it?
going to be 2027, 2028.
Uh-huh.
And, there was a previous plan, the Putney Road Master Plan, that did some visioning for that area that, was kind of transect based, which is really interesting, but it also, the population projections, I think, were not something that we were seeing. So, maybe there's something in between, but that's one area that we kind of feel
Yeah.
needs some attention in the next plan.
And makes sense too, with this reconstruction happening if there's, improving that area.
A couple years ago, we had a request for a preferred site, for renewable energy, a preferred
yeah.
site request, and then that kind of got us talking a bit about the energy. And there's some incentive or motivation or good reason to add an enhanced energy chapter, I think is what it's called, to the plan, but will all the work going into creating that actually pan out to actually, being very valuable or useful to us? That's maybe not so much, but there are some benefits to having it.
Yeah, energy is not really my area of expertise, but I have been told that enhanced energy plan, some people think it's valuable, but some people kind of aren't sure, like you, that it's really worth that effort.
Dan has his hand.
Oh, yeah, let's hear from Dan.
Yeah, hi Sue, and hi everyone. I just wanted to add the comment or the mention of one set of complaints that we have gotten recently, which is broadly about housing, or the lack of the seeming lack of planning around housing. And to this particular commenter, I think you might all remember the most recent in-person commenter we had. In any case, and I think, Sue, if you had any suggestions as to, how we can communicate, or if it needs to be written down, I don't know, but communicating about the town plan seems to be one of our needs, just making it clear to the public and when we have commenters, what we can do, what we can't do, what our limitations are, what we are doing, that kind of thing.
Right. and I'm just thinking off the top of my head, one way to maybe get the word out is to look at your implementations chart and think about some things that you could either do easily, sort of low-hanging fruit things to pick off, and then generate some press and, information about it that, would show folks that you are working on those things and you are, paying attention to what the plan said and trying to implement it, in as many ways as you could.
I would also suggest that in the town report, I write a report every year on behalf of the select board saying the ways that we are using the town plan. So that's one way that we try to communicate progress on the town plan.
Yeah.
So I guess for transparency, we put out there like each month where you're at, I guess, in a sense, as far as that is, or just
If
basically.
the planning commission wishes to do that.
If that's.
That would be a lot,
If that's
maybe.
something, the town planners, that's what I say.
I mean, we do it
Or
annually.
every week.
Every week, I mean, this is something to let them know because, housing is a big issue in the town. People want to know where they're at with the planning on how to move forward, what are we doing to plan housing. Now we have issues with, housing in the town. Not just Brattleboro, I think it's all over too, so something like that, we need to at least let them know that.
Right, you have made some changes to your bylaws, right, to encourage
Sure.
more housing,
Right.
Yeah.
and you could try to get the word out about that specifically,
Beat it.
any
Yeah, I
new
mean,
units that have been generated.
Respectfully to the persons that came to speak to the planning commission, I mean, we really haven't had time to digest those comments. I would
Right.
have some responses about how a town plan gets used statutorily and why it's not always the 20-year plan, it's a little bit more immediate, and how it gets used in regulatory areas. I think his point was also that, it doesn't really deal with some of the larger kind of existential crises that Brattleboro is facing.
Right.
Like climate refugees or that kind of thing. So
Right.
I would say we've been doing a lot about housing, so.
Yeah.
Maybe we could frame the message better.
Sustainable housing.
Well, and one of the comments, if I may add, and Sue, maybe you might have some suggestions about this specific thing, is essentially that, the questioning of numbers, right? So communicating clearly why we've come up with estimates for, a certain number of housing units. And I think, as Sue was saying, we are doing that and so forth, but I'm wondering if there are any suggestions that, from a broader perspective that where we could do better. I suppose it's, just a question of, really, back to that commenter, I don't think any of us appreciate the insinuation that somehow we're not being truthful, essentially, right? So that was, if you have any suggestions about whether it's, how people can understand the numbers in context, anything of that sort.
Mhm. Another thing could be to try and, elevate it on your webpage somehow and make that, so somebody comes to your website once a month and wants to know about housing. What is the town doing? Have like a button or something. This,
Yeah.
these are the steps we're taking, or.
Steve Hayes has been looking at, could we have some sort of dashboard that kind of tracks that in real time? And, we'll have a new website within the next few months here.
Yeah.
And have more ability to kind of use blogs and other things to keep people.
Oh, that
Because
would
the
be
way
great.
the town website's set up now, they did some additions, but, like Sue was saying, when you get the new one improved 5.0 up and running, I think
Right.
that, and also language is also an important thing. And I guess from our experience in the back, what type of housing, affordable, sustainable, low income, I think words need to be, because people were, in the past, when we did do our housing work, were saying, what type of housing is it? Is it affordable? Is it affordable for who?
Right,
Low
sure.
income, and you have
could
to have that,
Specify that. Sure.
specify that also, sustainable, and these are the things that we need to, the planners need to digest, look into, and see how to present that. So by presentation, always before you put it out there.
So what I'm hearing is that staff is already preparing an annual report addressing how we're meeting the objectives in the town plan, and we have it as a potential agenda item for the planning commission to review the implementation matrix. Is there anything else we need to be paying attention to right now?
What can the Windham Regional Commission do for us?
What can we do?
Ask not what they can do.
Well,
What can they do for us?
Well, we can help in a lot of different ways, and it partially depends on funding. You know, specific projects, whether we get funding from the state, like some of our funding, we're just getting some funding right now that is only for our smallest towns to help them. You know, those towns that have no staff at all. Well, a lot of them don't have. They have minimal staff, I would say, but some, you know, are especially bad off. But, you know, there are various things that come around. We're getting a lot of energy funding right now. We are getting some funding around housing, to have somebody to assist in housing. We're not real clear on what that means yet. That's something that's just, you know, coming from the state. So, you know, we can talk to you more about that, because a lot of our smaller towns, even though they really need help with housing, they're not going to be able to do much without having any infrastructure. And that's, you know, an advantage they have here, certainly.
Yeah, I think there's a couple areas that the Windham Regional Commission does help the town a lot with. So it's the brownfields. They obviously have a successful brownfields.
We just got more funding too, so.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
you know, I often are referring people that I might be talking to over to Sue and the brownfields program.
Yeah.
And then transportation planning. So if we need traffic counts, they can do that kind of work. They've helped us with cross intersection studies or crosswalk, like how people are crossing. And then mapping. They do a lot of our mapping work. They're currently working on an taking information on our agricultural lands and creating an online database for that. And then, Stephen, our sustainability coordinator, is working on energy with some staff there as well. I think those are like the kind of the key areas.
Did they help out with signage? So I think me and Tom did our whirlwind tour out there. About different areas, like, you know, where they're located and stuff, parking and all that. We mentioned that before. We're
I
gonna,
can't remember.
I don't know if that's
I don't know
something-
that they were involved with that, but
I don't know if that's something that can be.
a lot of that signage has been improved, if you've noticed.
Oh, really? Great.
Take a look.
Okay.
DPW's been working on it.
Oh,
Yeah, we're out
fantastic.
there on the road,
Great.
so we gotta get out there.
Yeah, so.
All right, well, also, I know that you recently updated your zoning bylaws. How do you feel like they're working?
In 2021?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it didn't lead to directly at least, that we tracked the creation of a couple dozen new
Yeah.
units. And
Yeah, I mean, the sky is not falling. That's what I
Yeah.
like to say.
Oh, and that
about
too,
it. It's
yeah.
like we got rid of the density
Yeah.
requirements,
Oh,
the
yeah.
caps, and like, just
Right, and it's not
It's not
becoming
a
a
problem.
skyscraper,
yeah.
area.
And those were the main changes that you made at that time?
At
that time,
Yeah. And otherwise, it seems to be generally working good?
Yeah, I mean, we have some other barriers to housing
Mhm.
construction that, you know, this next set, which we have a public hearing after this about, that staff's excited to put in.
Yeah, good.
So, yeah.
Any like kind of training that you think would be useful for the planning commission, for the town in general, related to, you know, these kinds of topics, even open meeting law or how to run a meeting, you know, some of the towns have expressed interest in that kind of thing. But don't know if
I
you
think
have any
that sort of
thoughts.
thing regularly, the basics. What was it, maybe less than a year ago, when the Regional Commission put on the
We do that
basics of
every
town
year.
planning,
Yeah,
right?
and
I
that will be
added,
again at the end.
we added that PDF PowerPoint to
Okay.
our electronic folder, so that's there as kind of education for any commissioners or the public to access.
Mhm.
And with a few new folks potentially coming on, maybe it makes sense to have a study session about it and the opportunity to ask questions if they arise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you have training this month Or is that through the state?
That's the basics, our
Somebody's-
basics of land
Is
use,
this
and Matt is doing it at the end of the month. I think it might be the last week, but
That's
also,
going to be taped because we have appointments by the end of the month.
uh-huh.
So we
We
potentially
can do that. We can make sure that we do that, hopefully.
Basics of land use, are you saying that synonymously with basics of town planning? Is that a different presentation or the same? or-
The one that Windham Region does every year, I believe, is called the Basics of Land Use.
Oh, okay, so I misspoke, okay.
That was a PowerPoint, because I
It was,
remember
yeah.
way back then, we had
Yeah.
one for us. You know, first Parliament talked about the mission statement, when people came on, what we're about, what we do, what our limitations are basically as planning planners and stuff, and what staff says and all that, and also about, the rules and what, we had put out. But I think we did one a while back, and I think we did it on Zoom when we were in hiatus at the time, yeah. So that, I guess, a refresher course or a reset, because there's a lot of new things. I know people coming on board could also be edified. Something like that would be great.
One thing that comes to mind for me is maybe, and these are things that, any individual could research on their own, but what maybe, there's 240-ish other towns in Vermont under the same statutes and powers for the most part. Some are smaller villages without staff and some are cities, but like, what's kind of the range of what planning commissions are working on elsewhere? And
I like
what's,
Hmm.
obviously we can look in statute and see what our powers are, but how does that translate actually to what other, the hundreds of other commissions are engaged in currently?
Even like big
Current
cities
events.
like Burlington or places like, how does Burlington's planning commission or the state itself, Montpelier, it's good to have that, scope to see how that is, because each one operates differently, but they're still the same, I guess, format, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
I think too, just adding on to that, kind of understanding what the hot topics are or what some best practices are in
Yeah.
terms of what people are implementing, I think would be really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they could zoom in and tell us how they're doing in their town.
Right. Yeah, and I believe that VLCT has some workshops this week online,
Yeah.
or this month.
I think so. Maybe that's why I was
Maybe
thinking
next
might both
week,
be doing-
right.
Like they have,
Yeah, I think one's geared towards planning commissioners maybe, and there might be another one.
one's on development review maybe.
And what does
Oh, yeah.
VLCT stand for?
Vermont League of Cities and Towns,
Mm-hmm.
and they're a nonprofit organization that do, a lot for the communities that are their members, and a lot of different ways, but education is one of the things they focus on.
Didn't you have one that you went away, I think, to up in Montpelier VLC Summit, like a big thing, and you invited us up at one time? That's the thing too, you might want to.
Sometimes they used to have in-person training.
Yeah, oh, that was awesome.
There was probably a bunch.
That's something like that,
Right,
Yeah.
the state does often do a larger conference on downtowns and historic preservation and stuff. This year they were doing a smaller one just for village centers, but yeah, that's
I
worthwhile if you
recommend
guys
that.
could attend that. Absolutely. And let's see, I'm trying to think if there's anything else we need to cover. Yeah, I know that you have 2 commissioners, so we're all set with that. Is there anything else that, you would like from us or suggestions?
I guess where you guys at right now as far as Windham Regional, where are you pursuing, what are you?
Well, one of the major things that we're doing is updating our regional plan.
Okay.
So that's a huge project. We're working with our committees, the commission's committees right now, and reviewing drafts of the different sections of the plan and the policies. And this is going to be a web-based plan, so it's going to be different than it has been in the past. It should be easier to use, more accessible, although if you wanted to print out a copy, you would be able to do that as well. So I think we'll have some more public meetings about that in the fall.
Right.
One of my colleagues, Matt Bachler, is leading that up. And then we'll have to have, go through the more formal review process. But it should be completed within the next, 2024, I would say. It should all be up and running, but we'll have drafts up before that.
Is there a role we play in that or anything we should know about how we fit into all of it?
Well, I guess, if Well, your commissioners, first of all, participate through the committees. I know Sue is one, that's why you pointed over there, and Ralph Mima. But if the planning commission itself has, other thoughts, as we're distributing that information, I'm sure you would share it with them, right?
Yeah.
You could let us know, Especially we're really trying to get feedback on the policies, because that's really the most important thing for us. We don't have a lot of money to do things ourselves, to implement, things, but we want to be able to support all the other organizations and work that, would make the region a better place to be. And so we write, from writing a lot of letters of support to, participate on grant applications and sitting on various committees like the Southern Vermont Housing Coalition to make sure that, we're integrally involved in all these kinds of things.
So Dan's
Okay.
hand is raised.
Oh, Dan again. Yep.
Yeah, hi. I just think that this might add to the question of how we can stay informed. I apologize myself. I have not been on your email list, Sue, but I'm looking at your website right now, and the Windham Regional Commission has a newsletter. So I suppose we should all stay informed that way.
I agree,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So it's windhamregional.org, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
that's-
and whether you want to get those things directly or have Sue share them, because she would receive it certainly.
Yeah.
Those are also things, if you go to our website too, you can see.
Of course, yeah. There's a lot going on. It looks great.
Maybe like a nice tour for the new people to go downtown to see what it's like, how they operate would be also, hands-on, just to see a site visit to where you're at and what you do. For the new people might be something, might be good.
Yeah.
Just to see where you're operating, how they operate
that,
would be
yeah.
a suggestion.
Sure,
I visited, beautiful place.
yeah.
Coffee shop in the back.
That's right.
Yeah, so much is on Zoom now, and that
Yeah.
is very convenient, but I don't know if you guys have the capacity there for, when you've had the yearly planning, basics of land use or planning, do you don't have a very big space there though?
No,
to do
not
right?
that big. We used to
So
do
it's always
it
webinars.
in person in town, or Newfane.
Oh, the Newfane
The New
Fire
York
place?
Fire
Oh, that's-
Station,
yeah,
yeah,
that's
because that was
good.
kind of central to the region,
Right.
but we haven't done in-person commission meetings since COVID.
Huh.
Right.
It's like Voc Rehab, once they open up Route I know they had it down there at the college. I don't know if didn't you guys rent out sometimes, like, there was a room down there way back?
Maybe I wasn't here
Oh,
then,
okay.
so.
I'm carbon dating myself with that.
Well, we're a little bit over our time,
Yeah.
but if there's are you all set?
No, I'm all set.
Okay.
As long as you guys
I
feel
saw you
like-
writing down a lot of notes.
Said
I
your
wrote
thing,
down some
then-
myself, so
Yeah,
we have a
great.
lot of possibilities to move forward with.
All right, well, thanks for having me.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
coming.
It's an informational session.
Okay, so we'll move on to our, how official do I have to, oh yeah, so I printed out a script. Right. So I'm going to continue our public meeting. It's kind of in the background while I call to order our public hearing on our proposed land use amendments. And I'll just read the what needs to be said. So this evening, the Planning Commission will be holding a public hearing on amendments to the land use regulations. This is the culmination of work that has occurred on and off since the current land use and development regulations were last amended in 2021. The recommended changes have come from several sources. These include the Development Review Board, which works with the regulations, staff within the town's Planning Services Department, some of which provide support to the Planning Commission meetings, Vermont's statutory changes, our current consultant, Brandy Saxton of PlaySense, who's there on Zoom, who did work for us, and Planning Commissioner's proposals. All of the amendments before us at this meeting have been reviewed by at least a majority of members of the Planning Commission. So a public hearing is conducted not only in public, but for the public. As such, we will be inviting public comment, and we are here primarily to listen to the public and ask questions of the public. During this public hearing, the Planning Commission may only clarify intent or technical aspects of the regulations. Commissioners will not be debating the merits of the amendments. But after we close the hearing tonight, we will be considering all of the comments and possibly making any further changes to the amendments as we deem necessary. Following any revisions we make, the proposed land use regs will be forwarded to the select board. They will have a couple public hearings, and they are the ones with the authority to actually adopt the land use regulations for the town. And their public hearings will likely be in July and August. So I believe that this public hearing was warned in accordance with state law, and I'd like to introduce our Brattleboro Planning Director, Sue Fillion, or maybe the planning technician, Steve Hayes, to review how this meeting was warned.
Sure, I will do that.
Okay, thank you, sir.
So the statute requires us to send a copy to our neighboring municipalities, so that's Dummerston, Guilford, Marlborough, Vernon, Halifax. I emailed that, I transmitted that, a copy of the proposed land use regulation amendments, the hearing notice, and the planning commission report on May 19th. I also sent it to the Windham Regional Commission and to the Department of Housing and Community Development as required by statute. In addition, on May 20th, there was a hearing notice in the Reformer. It was also posted on iBrattleboro and on the town's website. Honestly, I can't remember if I put it up on Front Porch Forum. I don't think I did because it was kind of long. It was also posted at 2 places in town, both the library and the municipal center, which are a couple places within this building. Those are our normal posting places. And again, the website as well. And yeah, that's what we were required to do by law.
Okay, excellent. So before, well, I'll say that the land use and development regulations amendments were available in a couple ways. It says on our agenda how to access the supporting documents for meetings. So that was one way to access it electronically, but of course you can also contact our staff at Planning Services Department and get the documents that way. And for people at the meeting, there will be a presentation, so it will be shown on the screen, and there's paper documents of the printed out available. But before we open up the hearing to comments from the public, I'd like to invite our staff as well as our consultant, Brandy Saxton, to give a brief presentation of the proposed amendments.
So I'm starting, right, Sue?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. I thought I remembered the agenda.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to briefly summarize some of the proposed amendments to Brattleboro's land use regulations that are related to the bylaw modernization grant and the effort to further remove any unintended barriers to housing within the town's regulations. Brattleboro received state funding to do this work. We reviewed the land use regulations for barriers to housing creation, particularly affordable housing, and in this context, that's a range of housing up to rental housing for households at 80% of median income and ownership housing up to 120% of median income. So it's also what we might also refer to as workforce housing or middle housing. We're proposing some housing-friendly amendments to the regulations and are aligning the regulations with statute. There's been some recent amendments to state statute really around housing that have just come into being in this last legislative session, and so we have followed throughout the process of doing this and trying to stay slightly ahead of that adoption process with the state's changes to statute. So work began at the end of last summer We did some neighborhood walks and tours and looked at housing around the community. Planning Commission has been working through the revisions, both these housing revisions and others that they will be discussing. And now we're at the process of considering adopting those regulations. So the housing related amendments include both some minor adjustments and then some larger pieces. So we'll start here with just some small adjustments to the regulations that are intended to open up more opportunity for housing in Brattleboro. So those include eliminating the owner occupancy requirement for properties with an accessory dwelling unit. So theoretically, both the accessory dwelling unit and the principal home could be rented out, be resident on the property. Removing the restriction on the number of bedrooms in an accessory dwelling. That's actually a statutory requirement. So they have moved the definition a bit in statute, and with that, some revision to the definition of story that this affects how building height is determined, which the idea is to try to provide a little more opportunity to utilize space that might be partially below grade or up under roof gable as residential space a bit more effectively. Been some redefining of the area downtown where ground floor residential is and is not allowed. So the place where you can't have ground floor residential right on the street would be limited to just Main Street, Elliott Street between Main and Church, and within storefront buildings. So buildings that have, the big storefront window type construction on the first level. There's been changes made previously in Brattleboro's regulations and these amendments as well that have required going in and making some adjustments to the provisions for planned unit developments, which are sort of larger, more complex projects with multiple buildings, typically. And so there's just been some realigning of everything there to make sure it all still works together. And then allowing for rooming and boarding houses in all zoning districts where other types of housing is allowed. The big focus of changes is in the set of so-called developed districts in Brattleboro. So these are essentially the areas in downtown and around West Brattleboro that have water and sewer service and are the more developed parts of town. So there's been adjusting to the dimensional standards in a number of the districts, the village center, service center, neighborhood center, and the mixed use neighborhood districts. The idea behind all of those small adjustments is to allow more compact developments and create opportunity for residential infill potentially with smaller lots or narrower lots or shallower setbacks. There's been some expansion in what would be allowed in terms of the size and height of buildings in these districts. And there's been an adjustment to the standards that get applied to certain types of housing, like attached housing, multi-unit housing, single room occupancies, and rooming or boarding houses, with, again, the goal of reducing barriers and keeping development costs low to facilitate housing creation. There's been some changes to the zoning map, which I think Sue or Stephen will probably also speak to in a little more detail. But the proposals include rezoning the rural business district that is currently in place in West Brattleboro and making that a neighborhood center zoning district, which already exists in several other towns. That will allow for a higher density of housing and more neighborhood serving businesses, kind of recognizing that that is that part of Brattleboro. Rezoning the lower portion of the Winston Prouty campus from institutional to mixed use neighborhood. That's to facilitate residential infill there that the owners are interested in pursuing. and a minor expansion of the Village Center District in West Brattleboro. And again, that is to support redevelopment of properties that Melrose and the chalet properties, as the needs of those property owners has changed a little bit. The residential neighborhood district, which encompasses a lot or nearly all of the neighborhood areas that are solidly residential in Brattleboro, around downtown Brattleboro and West Brattleboro. They're pretty diverse sets of neighborhoods. So some of those closer in neighborhoods are much denser, whereas if you get further out, they may be less dense. So the idea here is to split that one single large zoning district into two districts, separating out those denser, typically older neighborhoods that are closer to downtown, and then resetting the dimensional standards for that new, what we're calling residential neighborhood 36 district, so that it is set for smaller lots, narrower setbacks, larger buildings, more consistent with what's already built in many of those neighborhoods. The intent was to lower the number of non-conforming lots in the district and create some opportunity for infill in these areas. The new element that's being added is more major component of the amendment is to create a new overlay district, and we're calling it the Missing Middle Housing Overlay District. And this district overlays the entire set developed zoning district. So essentially where there is water sewer service in Brattleboro. And the idea here is to foster the creation of missing middle housing, and in that sense what we're talking about is not an income range but an actual range of types of buildings. So things that fall between a detached single unit home and a large apartment building. So duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, I can never say this one, quadruplexes, so 2, 3, 4s, townhouses, 5 to 9 attached units, cottage developments, sort of clusters of small footprint homes, 3 to 9 homes again, small apartment buildings, 5 to 9 buildings, units in a building. So this range, and that's one of the things when we went out and did the walks around Brattleboro, we found that there's actually historically a lot of these missing middle housing types in downtown, around downtown Brattleboro. There has been less of this type of housing built in the decades, probably post World War II decades. And so the idea is to encourage more of this, which can fit into the residential neighborhoods, utilize the available space and the available infrastructure creatively. So I've got a few slides that just give you a sense of what missing middle housing types can look like, from duplexes of various types and attached units, cottages, and small types of apartments as well. So what the missing middle housing overlay district does, it really creates sort of a checklist for each of these different types of housing. And if a property owner can check off all the boxes that they meet the requirements, there's a very simplified administrative review process to go forward with and get approval for infilling on property with this type of housing. It also creates some flexibility for creating new lots or providing access to buildings. So things like being able to split a property that might be narrow but deep front to back and have 2 lots with a house in the front and a house in the back. Those are the types of things that the zoning can sometimes make a little bit more challenging. So the the idea here is to really simplify that process when some basic criteria are met. So that's, Sue, is the rundown of the housing changes. And I'll stop the screen sharing.
Thank you. And then Steve has a brief presentation as well about some of the other changes that the Planning Commission is proposing, particularly related to uses in certain districts. Steve, are you able to bring up the presentation?
Yeah, I'm gonna try to share my screen now. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Are my slide notes in the way for everyone, or is that just on my screen?
Just on your screen.
Okay, excellent. Let's see if I can make that full screen for everybody. Okay. So, pardon me. I'll briefly present a summary of the bylaw modernization grant project that we've worked on. The planning department, the planning commission, and Brandy, who has been a consultant on this project for us. So we've covered most of the changes as it pertains to major differences in standards and district changes, but some of the more specific minutia of land use changes are going to be covered in this presentation. So a primary land use can be permitted, conditional, or unlisted, which can also be described as sometimes prohibited or otherwise not provided for. And a permitted use, which is sometimes elsewhere called a by right use, is something that is considered on its face to be something that's appropriate for an area and can receive a zoning permit quite easily through a administrative process and doesn't need to go to a public hearing specifically for approval of that land use. Whereas a conditional use is sort of sitting in the middle there, where it needs to receive approval in a public hearing by the Development Review Board in order to receive a permit and be built out. And unlisted uses are generally not provided for and considered inappropriate generally, but some which are considered materially similar to a listed permitted or conditional use would be able to be considered as one of those under the language of our existing and proposed bylaws. Pardon me. So that's fairly dry. So a more interesting question to members of the public who might be here with us tonight is, what does that mean for me? Which is, if you have an existing permitted use and it is proposed to remain a permitted use, there's nothing to worry about. You can easily change a permitted use to another permitted use with a simple administrative approval, as I mentioned. And things that are existing conditional uses are unlisted or non-conforming uses can be requested to change to an existing listed, to a listed permitted use with that simple approval process. But if the use that your property is currently vested under is shown to be changing from a permitted use to a conditional or unlisted use, or is shown to be changing from a conditional use to an unlisted use, that doesn't mean that you are no longer allowed to operate as that use immediately. You are able to exist as a nonconformity indefinitely insofar as that use doesn't get abandoned. Although my understanding is that that doesn't apply to residential uses as per the language of our zoning bylaw. And a conditional use can be exchanged to a different conditional use with the approval of the Development Review Board. But in most cases, if your use that exists at the present is being changed to a unlisted or non-conforming use with the proposed changes, then after those land use regulations go into effect, should they be approved and adopted, that would mean that expanding on the size or scope of the existing non-conforming use will probably not be something that can be done under most circumstances. But we don't have a particularly large number of changes here in the type of dramatic fashion that would allow, that would send certain uses from permitted all the way down to not being allowed anymore. So we have one use that was not previously a listed use that is now going to be, or proposed to be, a permitted use, and that is rooming and boarding house within the waterfront district. We have 3 uses that are proposed to be promoted, so to speak, from conditional uses as they're listed at the present to permitted uses. So that is a bar or drinking place in the village center district and the neighborhood center district, a single unit attached dwelling, which colloquially might also be referred to as a row house or a townhouse, or even some kinds of condos. Those type of attached single family, often owner occupied housing types are being promoted, so to speak, from conditional to permitted use in the service center district. And then we also have rooming and boarding house being added to permitted uses where it is conditional at the moment in the residential neighborhood district. And then we have 3 uses that are becoming conditional uses that were unlisted uses, and that's parking structure in the mixed use residential district and, the mixed use district in the residential neighborhood district, as well as surface parking in those districts. And I'll note that this is in reference to specifically a primary standalone use on a parcel, or a primary use on a parcel. It doesn't refer to all kinds of off-street parking that you may see on a parcel. In virtually all cases outside of the urban center district, we're still requiring a minimum amount of parking to be built out with an approved primary use. So this is specifically speaking to neighborhood scale parking facilities that are able to be shared among developments at that neighborhood scale in support of the new missing middle housing overlay district and the neighborhood scale housing that we are aiming to make more easy to produce through these regulatory changes. And then we also have rooming and boarding house in the rural residential and rural district. We generally didn't touch the rural areas of town in any sense through these regulations, but that was one of the rare situations where there is a minor change. And the first few uses that are being essentially downgraded from permitted use to conditional use, which doesn't mean that they're no longer allowed, but that they will need to have conditional approval from a public hearing with the Development Review Board. Surface parking in the urban center district and parking structure garage in the service center district. And as I mentioned above, this is referring to specifically the primary use of the parcel, not generally parking. Although in the urban center district, there are more complications on using parking as your primary use. Single unit detached dwellings in the service center district, as well as single unit attached dwellings in the service center district, are being added to conditional from permitted. as well as duplexes. And uses that are being essentially dropped out of the use table include single unit detached dwellings in the urban center. I believe at present there's only one, possibly zero examples of this. And then we also have malls and shopping centers in several districts, heavy construction business in the service center, industrial park in the service center, mini warehouse and a portion of a mixed-use building in the service center, stable or equine facility in the service center, kennel in the service center, automobile service, automobile repair service, rental or leasing or outdoor storage in the mixed-use district, and surface parking in the neighborhood district. And as with surface parking and parking structure, as I described, outdoor storage also, of course, refers to the primary use of a parcel. And this is not to say that any and all kinds of outdoor storage of things that are incidental to a primary use would no longer be allowed for. So many of these uses were agreed by staff and I believe the Planning Commission to be sort of redundant or describing more a collection of existing uses that we do provide for. So in many ways, these uses are not wholesale being removed as a possibility in those areas of town, but we think that the simplification of removing those kind of redundant uses was worth doing. So we also had a few changes to the accessory uses, definitions, and standards. First, the small accessory structures permitting exemption is an exemption added to our general existing section on exemptions from local zoning permitting at the beginning of our land use regulations. And this is granting an exemption from local zoning permitting to small accessory structures that are below 100 square feet in area and below 12 feet in height. The second item here is neighborhood commercial units. This is a new piece of land use regulations that's being added that has previously not been a part of the LUR. This will be a new pathway to small neighborhood scale commercial development within the residential neighborhood districts, both the 3600 and the 5400, as a way of allowing for small local business that is resident owned and operated at a 500 square feet or less footprint on a primarily residential parcel. And this is intended to allow for some economic opportunity for local folks, as well as creating this sort of neighborhood-oriented, semi-public, semi-private meeting spaces that are sometimes called third places that really bring vibrance to a community, but without allowing full primary use commercial uses to compete with housing in our primarily residential neighborhoods because of the importance of preserving those housing units. So we also made some minor changes to our multifamily housing standards. These are specific additional language that applies to multifamily housing, which I believe our thresholds have that term kick in at 5 units. But we've made some alterations to the required amenities and design elements of buildings so that the new missing middle housing overlay district can slot in without conflict. So we've generally made the requirement for outdoor open space that we already require. We've right-sized that to a much greater extent for the kind of developments that we expect to see in the kind of developable parcels we expect to see without creating a direct conflict for that limited space. more or less kicking in at the 10-unit threshold, or intensifying above the 10-unit threshold. Attached dwelling standards have changed slightly. This was to allow for the specific unique geometry of attached dwellings to be able to have its own dimensional standards. And that's because the middle units and the end cap units of a row of housing have a different number of side setbacks than your typical detached building, or sometimes they may even have no rear setback if they're abutting in rear as well as to the sides. So this is to allow for that specific case that is unique to that specific use to be allowed for. But this particular language, as well as the language that you may have seen in the base zoning districts that says X number of feet or 0 if attached, that doesn't mean that a new structure could just unilaterally build up to the be built up to the lot line without the cooperation of the abutter, except for the urban district where that's already the case. This is specifically referring to either existing structures that already cross a parcel line, or when subdivided, or new build or substantial renovation projects that will be deliberately crossing parcel lines when subdivided. We additionally have changed our language for single room occupancy, also called SRO, and rooming and boarding house accessory uses. And this is primarily in what we are requiring of those use types internally. We, broadly speaking, don't get into the innards of a building and require what needs to go inside there because that's far more like building code, which we don't really get into at a local level here. So a lot of what we were getting at was somewhat like building code in many ways. So the commission, I believe this is a correct characterization, wanted to move away from some of that and simplify what was being required while maintaining appropriate minimum standards for housing. And we also added a section, footprint lots, which pardon me, I can't recall if that was already addressed. So if that came up in the prior conversation, I can just move past that. But this is a brief section added to allow for the lots to be subdivided that are otherwise smaller than the minimum required square footage or acreage of a lot by base district standards, but would allow for the exact footprint of the building to be subdivided for as its own lot. The changes that we've made other than that, as you've heard, we did eliminate the rural business district. Most of those, or we're proposing to do so, most of those parcels have been rezoned or are proposed to be rezoned as neighborhood center, but a few of them are proposed to be rezoned to RN 5400. Additionally, the Winston Prouty campus has been proposed to be rezoned from institutional as it is now to a split between the mixed use district and the rural residential district. The already developed portion that is in the north towards Maple Street and along Austin Drive is being proposed to become mixed use district, and the primarily undeveloped portion that is uphill and in the southern portion of this large parcel is proposed to be rezoned as rural residential. And I'll note as well that existing constraints on development are in place through the current Act 250 permit and master planning in effect. But the rural residential district also would require that any new subdivisions be permitted as conservation subdivision, as far as I understand. So that's worth keeping in mind. And finally, there were a few parcels that are being proposed to rezone as village center that are currently residential neighborhood parcels. And those are in the vicinity of the western portion of West Brattleboro Village.
Thanks, Steve. Tom, that's all we have for presentations. So
Okay.
back to you.
All right.
Well, for members of the public in attendance who wish to comment, feel free also, in addition to your comment, to ask for any documentation to be called up on the screen for secondary review or recall. But with that said, I think we have one member of the public only, right there in attendance in person. Would you like to comment or say anything?
Sure.
So come up, I believe, to that microphone.
If you want, you can sit at the
Yes,
table.
Or you can sit if you'd like to.
All right.
Yeah, the
Just don't
microphones are
drink
just
Lots of
for,
things. Yeah.
would it be helpful for me to put up any maps?
No. No, really my only comment is that I think, it's great that we're trying to figure out how to accommodate housing.
Mhm.
So many of the map changes and the restrictions and, just accommodating housing, I think is really, really valuable.
Mark, for the record, can I have you introduce yourself?
Mark Westa, 42 Green Hill Parkway. Beyond that, obviously, I am involved in the Winston Prouty project, and I think the mixed use at the front makes good sense. We've had some discussions about the rear part. I think rural residential is fine, and whatever happens there will be a long ways off. So really, that's fine.
So I guess just to get an idea, what is there for, I guess, your description, or what is it that you're doing for the public of everyone up there at Winston Prouty?
So the idea is a mixed-use infill development, mostly on the campus, kind of the core campus area.
I remember, Mark, and this isn't necessarily germane to this, to the amendments that we're looking at, but I remember at the site visit, one thing I think you mentioned was that you think maybe that the rural residential district isn't actually, or it has limitations, or actually kind of, limitations for actual landscape preservation, even though that's maybe what its purpose says. So
Right.
I think after these amendments, maybe I think I kind of know what you're getting at, but it'd be nice, maybe we can actually look at the rural districts and be like, how can we actually make these follow through with the purposes that they state?
Right.
Because I think you were saying that you find that actually, in some ways, the residential neighborhood district could promote denser and more compact and more conservation of the development and more conservation of the actual natural areas,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
kind of ironic because that's not in line with the purposes of the
Right.
district. So that'd be something just for us to note and look at
Yeah.
later, I think.
I think when you think about sort of large lots
Right.
in a place that has difficult topography and other issues, you're going to get very scattered housing.
Right.
Which
Yeah.
isn't
Low
really-
density sprawl or something.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And especially in that place where there is infrastructure fairly nearby,
Right.
even to some of the upland areas.
Yeah.
So that's my concern.
Right.
Yeah, because you did mention, like, when we doing our site visit up that long, beautiful hill. Good exercise, by the way. In the back of the wetlands also, too, that's underdeveloped. Are you looking into that also, or just leaving that unscathed? Top, when we went up to the top?
The hill itself, yeah, that's not
Okay,
going to be developed.
okay.
That will be protected in any plan that the Winston Prouty puts forward.
Yeah. Anything else from you?
No.
Okay. And I don't think there's any other members of the public. Perhaps
I don't know if there's any public
No,
participants.
there's no
Any
other
phone
members.
calls or
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
no calling?
Well, so I'll say then, I guess before I close the public hearing that I'll just remind people listening now or later that this will go to the select board twice. They have to hold 2 public hearings.
Right.
And then they'll decide whether or not to adopt the amendments. And can the select board make any revisions they like as well?
The select board can make revisions or they can send it back to the planning commission. for
Right,
revisions.
So there's various things that can happen. But great, okay, so I will adjourn the public hearing and bring us back to the underlying, just regular, open public meeting. And you can stay and comment for this, next agenda item, or we have a public comment period too, just about anything having to do with the planning commission.
Yeah.
Or feel free to leave.
Go eat dinner.
Yeah, right, oh, that sounds good.
Thank you.
So, we saw the presentations, commissioners, and we heard a public comment. So it'd be great if we end this agenda item by, I'd like us to, vote on sending these amendments and any revisions that we now might make with the written report that we saw last meeting that staff created. If we can send both those things to the select board for their consideration.
Or you want a motion, you need a motion to have that, this now?
Oh, well, let's do it, yeah, Robert's rules. Yeah.
Rules. Any discussions or anything else anyone want to interject? I don't know. Dan or Sarah?
I think it's a good idea. Do you want me to make that motion and then we'll?
Absolutely.
So I move that we submit the amendments to the land use and development regs as presented and as provided in the backup materials to the select board.
I second.
And the written report as well to them and to the town clerk for public review.
I'd second that.
You second it?
Absolutely.
Now, is there any discussion or changes to the motion, or I think, further revisions to the amendments?
Any revisions?
I caught one. When we were talking about the service center a few months ago, and staff proposed, I think, the changes to the use table, striking the heavy construction business from conditional. Then I think what we settled on was that, well, then there's nowhere in town where heavy construction business is allowed. And I don't think I caught in the presentation that was added. Oh, and then we I'm looking back at the minutes of February 6th, we agreed to add it to the industrial district then, because it wasn't previously in there. And I think,
I do recall that.
right, and the draft of the amendments doesn't capture that.
Yep.
I think I was just looking at that 10 minutes ago, but let me just check again. Industrial district,
Okay, so it's the heavy,
heavy construction business.
Okay.
And then, I think the draft before us also misrepresents the change to the service center about the mini warehouse. It used to be under conditional and just say mini warehouse. And reading the minutes, my recollection, you guys proposed making it prohibited, but then we settled on, well, let's add the caveat
yeah.
or that it be allowed as a portion in a multi-use building, like the wording in some other districts. But then in the draft before us, it has that wording, but it's crossed out.
Yeah, when Steve presented it, I was like,
Yeah.
that's not right. We wanted it conditional, so
Right.
I didn't catch that. So let's see.
Does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we want it to be a conditional use,
Continue being
If it's-
conditional use,
But-
but with a portion of it in a it can only be with a multi-use building,
right,
a portion of it.
right.
So you're
And
amending it, or you just?
Well, that's the only thing I caught. I mean, that's not necessarily an amendment per se. I mean, it's an amendment to the draft document before us, but it's in line with what we've already decided at the
Yeah.
previous meeting. And the mismatch between the figures, you know, that I brought up at last meeting and some of the documents, Sue already told me that will be addressed before the for
It
the
will
final
be-
publication.
Yeah, it will be addressed, because there was a quick turnaround from our comments, and that's kind of a more of a formatting
Sure,
issue.
yeah.
There's a quick turnaround since from our May meeting to when it needed to be warned. We're just
Oh, that's
gonna,
right.
it will be fixed.
Do you have to
But-
ratify that? I mean, if that's an addition that wasn't inclusive in the language, right?
No,
Well, we
it's a
already-
formatting issue.
Yeah, we already talked
okay.
about it at last
Okay.
meeting.
It's a
I mean,
formatting issue.
I think the minutes say,
And
you
we'll
know,
just
that will be
push
addressed.
along, let them, if they want to add anything, select board or subtract or question or public, then we can,
Are you talking about the formatting or just everything?
I would say everything.
Oh, everything.
Yeah,
Well, we'll know after they're.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
But if, yeah. Lynn, I might close this. Do you have anything?
No,
No.
but we might want to vote.
Oh, right.
Yeah, we might know.
Well, go ahead. Okay.
Yes, okay. Like an SOS.
So Dan, Sarah, Gary, anything else, or staff, anything, any last minute, you know, things you caught or changes that we haven't talked about that you feel
Steve's cat.
are compelling? No? Okay, so hopefully you all recall the motion I made, and, but the amendments that aren't really amendments, but just, you know, fixing those typos, I guess, will be done. Let's vote on that motion.
Aye.
All those in favor, please raise your hand, and I hope Sarah can
Oh,
join
yes,
up for this. That's
that-
Gary and myself.
There's that
Sarah's
hand.
hands up and
There it
down.
is.
So that's 4. Lynna had her hand up when she ran out. I don't know if we can consider that or not.
I don't know. I have to put that one up.
Don't need it. So to be safe, we can say
The running
abstention.
hand.
So all we have left is the public comment period. There being no public here.
Nope. Well, there's none on that little side.
I mean, it would show everyone, right, as boxes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I
So-
would think it's usually on the side.
I
it
just see
shows
staff and commissioners and myself.
no phone calls or.
Oh, here she is, maybe she wants to register her vote.
Do you want to register your vote?
I do. I'm
All
so
right.
sorry.
You're in favor?
I am.
Okay, so that's all 5 of us.
Unless it's a team effort, look at that.
So no public comment. We finished all of our business. Our amendments will go to the select board. Oh, and I guess it's kind of an announcement, but I would encourage commissioners to show up to one or both of those public hearings. I think staff will do a really good job of presenting, but you know, we changed a lot, and there could be good to, if you recall a motivation or a reason for changing something. Obviously, you know, it's hard to speak for other commissioners, but it can be good if the select board's like, why is this being changed? And staff maybe
So
has.
Sue, you're presenting or
Staff may have a
Steve?
blank moment. I think all 3 of them may present again, but I don't know.
I don't think Brandy will, I think
Okay.
it'll be Steve and I, combination of
Okay.
the,
I just didn't know she was gonna be,
yeah.
you know, giving her, if they ask, they wanna interrogate her, ask her.
No, I mean, we need to be, it's our work, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Good to have that team.
it was nice to have her present tonight.
Mhm.
There was one more presentation in the contracts that we did.
Okay, will you 2 be using that document?
Yeah.
That she, okay, oh, great. Okay, I move that we adjourn.
Oh, we've got the
Or
awards.
I declare that we're adjourned.
You
All
need
right.
the awards plaque.
Oh, she already
Okay.
spoke
Oh, you
to
did the award plaque
We're
already,
good.
Sue? You showed
Yeah.
them the plaque or? Oh.
We're adjourned.
We are
adjourned.
officially adjourned, people.
You wanted your last meeting to continue on a little bit.
I
more.
tell
We're
you,
not done yet.
I just want to grind.